All right, we're diving into the incredible story of Cantonese. And believe it or not, this is a language that acts as a direct link, a kind of time machine, to the ancient past.
So let's kick things off with a bit of a puzzle, one that has fascinated linguists for centuries. Have you ever tried to read classical Chinese poetry out loud? If you've tried it in Mandarin, you might have noticed something, well, a little strange about the rhymes.
Okay, so look at this. This is where it gets really interesting. We've got a famous Tang Dynasty poem here. Now, in Mandarin, the last words of each line are supposed to rhyme. But listen, xie and wan. They just don't fit the pattern. But then, you switch over and recite it in Cantonese, and suddenly, bam, C4, Ga1, Mon5, and Fa1. It flows perfectly. The rhythm and rhyme are totally intact. Now, that's not a coincidence. It's our first big clue.
This whole poetry puzzle is our way in. It's this giant, flashing sign that Cantonese has a really unique ancient connection to the language spoken back in China's golden age of poetry.
But here's the twist. The real answer isn't actually in the Tang Dynasty. To solve this thing, we have to rewind the clock way, way back, over 2,000 years, to the very beginnings of southern China as we know it.
The story of how Cantonese came to be is just this amazing saga of conquest, migration, and the blending of cultures, and it created a language with these really distinct, fascinating layers.
The best way to understand how Cantonese was formed is to think like a geologist. Seriously. The language is built on two main layers. You have a substrate, which is the original local language, and then a superstrate, which is the language of powerful newcomers that gets laid right on top.
So the foundation, that substrate, was the language of the native Baiyue people. But the language that would really define the region, the superstrate, was the formal, courtly language brought down from central China. And it was this top layer that would become the main body of modern Cantonese.
And this timeline shows you exactly how it happened. In 214 BC, China's very first emperor conquers the south, and he brings his administrators and their language with him. Then, just about a decade later, one of his generals establishes a new kingdom there and makes that court language, the Qin accent, the official tongue. And just like that, the superstrate was cemented in place.
But that leads to the next big question, right? How on earth did that 2,000-year-old version of Chinese survive so perfectly in the south, while the language up in the north was changing so dramatically?
Well, scholars have this beautiful term for it. They call Cantonese a living fossil of Middle Chinese. And Middle Chinese, that was the official language spoken during the Tang and Song Dynasties. You know, the exact time our rhyming poem was written. It all connects.
It really boils down to two key factors. First, geography. The massive Five Ridges mountain range basically acted like a giant wall, sealing off the south from all the chaos in the Central Plains. And second, because of that isolation, you had political stability. While the north was in a constant state of war, the south was a relative sanctuary of peace.
So here's the crucial point. All that peace and isolation turned the region into a linguistic time capsule. The language of the Tang and Song poets was essentially frozen in time, perfectly preserved in the south, kind of like an ancient insect you see trapped in amber.
That stability in the south is exactly what sets the stage for the Great Split, this huge fork in the road where the languages of the north and south started heading down two completely different paths. And this slide just lays out the two journeys perfectly. They both started from the same ancient court language, but the southern path, Cantonese, was all about preservation. The northern path, which became Mandarin, was a story of radical change thanks to centuries of invasions. And the real turning point? That was the Yuan dynasty, which was founded by the Mongols.
See, during the Yuan dynasty, a new kind of popular entertainment, opera, just exploded across the north. This opera used the local Beijing dialect, which was a simpler, more blended language. It became so incredibly popular that this dialect became the new standard, and that formed the foundation of what we now know as Mandarin.
Okay, so we've got this ancient, preserved language just thriving in its southern fortress. So how did it break out and become a major player on the world stage?
Well, two huge historical events just catapulted Cantonese onto the world stage. First, in 1757, the emperor decreed that Guangdong, also known as Canton, would be the only port in China open to foreigners. So if you were a Western merchant, you had no choice. You had to learn the local language, Cantonese. Then, in the mid-1800s, huge waves of people left the region, carrying their language with them to every corner of the globe.
And the result of that history is just staggering. Today, an estimated 120 million people around the world speak Cantonese.
Because of that history of trade and migration, Cantonese established this powerful global footprint. If you go to many of the oldest Chinatowns in places like the US, Canada, or Australia, you'll find Cantonese is still often the main language spoken. It truly cemented its status as one of the world's most influential languages.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Cantonese isn't just another dialect. It is a living, breathing connection to the past. It's a cultural time capsule that carries the actual sounds of ancient China, from the armies of the first emperor to the poets of the Tang Dynasty.
And that leaves us with a final, really important question to think about. When a language holds this much history, the echo of ancient poems, the story of empires, the voices of millions all over the world, what does it mean for all of us if that time capsule is one day closed for good?